Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Average Gamer podcast. I'm Grant from Over the Edge, and as usual, I'm joined by Sully from OneGuy'sOpinion and Joe Chip. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Xbox Scorpio leaks, the Nintendo Switch, the reactions to the console release, and the rumoured upcoming supplemental computer device, or SCD. And the final subject is why so few games are released in January and February. So here's Sully with his subject, which is the Xbox Scorpio leaks.
I've actually just recorded a video on this, which will probably go up before this cast. So there's been rumoured leaks, again, regarding the Scorpio's power. You know, it's the usual stuff. It's going to have apparently 6 teraflops of compute power, blah, blah, blah. But what really captured my interest with these Scorpio leaks was the fact that Microsoft seemed to be taking a similar route or a page from the PlayStation 4 Pro, whereas they are apparently rumoured to be giving the developers control over where they want to apply the Scorpio's power. And I kind of thought that was interesting. One, I think it's pro-consumer, and I like the idea to be given, you know, not the same experience that you would get on a PC with all the options you get, but to be given the ability to play in either 1080p or 4K or pick a few graphical settings. I want the choice. I thought that was cool, and I think that's pro-consumer. But I also kind of wanted to touch on how do we think this could potentially affect the PS4 Pro, because in my head this is the one thing it definitely had going for it. And to be honest, I thought the Scorpio was just going to be the 4K Xbox One, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Well, we've already got that, haven't we, with the Xbox One S, I guess. It's sort of like which is like the intermediary. I just think it's another example of how Microsoft are clawing back kind of goodwill, aren't they, from the sort of the launch of the Xbox One was a bit of a disaster with this multimedia over games kind of message, and taking it that logical step further where they're giving, like you say, power to developers to approach the games how they see fit. And I think it's a very deliberate ploy in order to claw ground back from Sony and basically, you know, put themselves in a more prominent position in terms of competing in the market. I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because if they are giving power to the developers like the rumor suggests, is that yes, this was something big that the Pro had going for it, but the Pro, you know, if the specs are true regarding the Scorpio and it is 6 teraflops, it's going to have an extra 2 teraflops of power. So that could be huge for the Pro in terms of, you know, we're talking about 1080p difference in visual quality. You know, the graphics should be substantially better on the Scorpio. And I think when you put those side by side in a store, it's going to be pretty, the Scorpio is going to be a really compelling option.
Assuming developers work up to the Scorpio, you know, because,
that's a good point.
You know, given that the PS4 will have the biggest market share, they may well be looking at the PS4 Pro as the kind of sweet spot for them. So that could count against the Scorpio. Hope not. Hope it doesn't.
Because I know that used to be the case with, you know, the previous gen. Like they'd build everything to run on the 360 and then they'd port it to the other systems, even though technically the PS3 was more powerful. And do you think that's still going to be the case, though? Do you think they're still going to be going, okay, here's the base that we're going to build on, being the PS4 Pro, and then we're going to scale back for the base models, and then we're going to scale up for the Scorpio? Or do you think now they are literally just going to have different graphic profiles? Like it's not going to be, well, it's only looks as good as the Pro because we made one version and then ported it. Or do you think that those times are gone? Like there's now just different graphic profiles, and I don't want to say a slider, but you know, they scale the graphics up for the Scorpio and they scale it down for the base models.
I think that's a fair bet, actually, given that you're looking at doing that within a brand. So you're going to be looking at doing that across the Xbox or the Xboxes, and you're going to be looking at doing that across the PS4s, however many of each of them you end up getting. But if they're talking about, you know, backwards compatibility, forwards compatibility, whatever, then you probably are looking at that. But I also think there's a possibility that you might see it being on a game-to-game basis. You know, if you're talking about being pro-consumer, you're talking about being pro-developer, then maybe they might give, you know, a little bit of leeway to the developers to decide how they're going to go about doing it.
Well, yes, certainly with third-party titles, I could definitely see that happening, yeah. I mean, that's been kind of the grey area with the pros, the mixed bag, and I think throwing the Scorpio in just probably complicates it even more. I mean, it's been shown in the past, if the power's there, developers will happily max it out and whinge about not having enough power, so...
Yeah, I was just going to say, you say that, but, I mean, a lot of people have complained that we're still getting, on the base PS4, we're still getting games that aren't running at 60 frames per second, 1080p, even though we were promised that from the start. And it's like, they haven't really exploited the full power of the base PS4 yet, have they? And I wonder if it's because the reason why we're getting these incremental console upgrades is because developers have said, well, we want it to be easier to exploit the power of the console. So can you give us a console that's more developer friendly as well as consumer friendly, if you see what I mean? I wonder if that's an aspect of it that's sort of influenced why we're getting these kind of these upgraded consoles, because it's easier to exploit the power of these than it is the base PS4 or the base Xbox, for instance. Well,
I was going to say that the problem there is, and this one keeps raising its head, is are we going to eventually see a situation where the developers push to just have a game for the Pro or just have a game for the Scorpio?
Yeah, they
said
they wouldn't allow it, though, didn't they?
So well, they did, but
yeah,
they said no to that, but they'll keep saying no right up until the point where they don't say no anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
If a developer comes along with a potentially massive hit and they're saying, look, we can't shoehorn it into the vanilla PS4, but we can, do it with the PS4 Pro, or the same with the Scorpio, against the vanilla Xbox, then it's going to be a difficult call for Microsoft or Sony to say no, isn't it?
I've got 2 points for this. Just one, going back to what you said, Grant, about developers being able to exploit the greater power. I mean, essentially, these machines are, x86 computers in a small form factor. And I think if given enough time, developers would be hitting 1080p 60 frames per second on the PS4, even though it's a lot easier to max out this hardware than what previous generations were, because they used custom hardware, and it took developers a longer amount of time to build engines and tools to use the hardware because it was custom, it wasn't standard.
Yeah,
but I think if given the time, they always seem to find a way to eke out more power.
Well, they
Even
do.
If
yeah.
It's just refining the engines over and over and over again. You're always going to eke out a little bit more power. But I think you're right. Like they've made this leap for greater power in these machines to, one, probably because consumers are hungry for it to a point, but also, to please developers and keep pushing the boundaries. And I think it's just become a more competitive environment between PlayStation and Xbox. I think it's just the environment they live in now. Like it's cutthroat, it's fast, and it's not realistic to expect them to last 10 years anymore. It's you wouldn't even dream of that happening anymore.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to say was, is a kind of natural effect of this sort of these incremental console upgrades. Will we then see more kind of more uniformity between like all three gaming platforms? So we're getting like upgraded consoles. Gradually, I think the consoles were just getting closer and closer to PC performance in terms of value for money. Because it's like you're saying, the x86 machines, they are basically PCs. In console form. So I think consumers are demanding more power from consoles for the money that they're paying for them. And kind of at the same time, they look at the PC, which is, although it's more specialist because you have to pay more money to get better graphical performance, I think the natural outcome of this is that you will see a much more closer knit kind of gaming environment between all three platforms.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going that way, I think. And we've already seen Microsoft openly admit that they're happy to work with Sony on cross-platform multiplayer. It's just a matter of Sony coming to the ballpark on it. I mean, if that happened, I think it'd be fantastic, because there's been so many times where, in recent memory with Destiny, where I couldn't play with my PlayStation buddies or I couldn't play with my Xbox buddies, and I had to buy 2 fucking copies and have 2 different characters. Even though they're on the same, they're running on Bungie servers and all that, I'm separated by consoles. It drives me nuts, that kind of stuff. It's probably at the top of my wish list. But yeah, back to what you said, Joe, about Sony and Microsoft eventually opening that can of worms and saying, okay, well, we're going to do an exclusive to the Scorpio that the base Xbox isn't getting. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen in the Microsoft camp. I could see it happening in the PlayStation camp purely because Sony have been kind of coy about what's going on with these upgrades. They haven't opened up the can of worms and told us their plan for how they're going to handle this upgrades. They basically just said this is their stopgap console, but there's still going to be a PlayStation 5 and they're sticking to a traditional console generation cycle.
Spot on there. I think that you're looking at this and basically we're looking at a different ethos between the two companies.
Yeah, that's right.
Microsoft are very much looking at having a overarching
family
service, if you like, a family of consoles, whatever you want to call them, that look backwards and forwards. And, it's no secret that Phil Spencer looks at Nintendo and looks at their back catalogue and is, sort of wide-eyed and envious because he would love to see something like that for Xbox.
And they don't utilise it.
Well, and they don't utilise it. But I think that, if you had somebody like Phil Spencer who had that at his fingertips, I think it would get utilised. But yeah, I think there is. I think you're right there, Sully. I think there's a different focus from the two companies, and I think it may show up in what we see in the future.
It's very clear and transparent with what they've told us. Like, they've told us that there is going to be hardware that's constantly stepping forward, but you don't need to be concerned because it's staying within a family of devices. Now, as soon as you start releasing exclusives for one or the other, you break that family. You've instantly shot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
And with the whole backwards and forwards compatibility, they can't do it. It has to stay within, this family of devices. There's going to be a very clear cut group of devices that are in this family that will kind of just, like I've said previously in other casts, it will just keep leapfrogging forward.
Do you know what? I think they'll even go further than that. I think that even when the next Xbox appears, if it is a break with the Xbox One and they're moving into a different architecture or whatever it might be, I still think, given what happened with the Xbox One when it was first released and all the hoo-ha about backwards compatibility, and you look at their focus now, I think if you're looking at the next Xbox, I think from the ground up, from day one, they'll be looking at backwards compatibility.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's why they've gone PC architecture from the Xbox One. It's for backwards compatibility and its developers.
It's built into the ethos now, isn't it? It's part of what Microsoft do, and it's kind of like it's a differentiator in the console market for them.
Of course, that doesn't mean it couldn't be all change at the top and everything changes 2 years down the line.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's working for them, isn't it? The brand is strengthening and they have hit their stride. I mean, the sales don't suggest it yet, but in the eyes of the consumer, from 3 years ago, it's a completely different Xbox.
Oh, absolutely.
If they hadn't have done that, I think the sales would be looking a lot worse.
Oh, yeah,
they
definitely.
are.
They bit the bullet on that one. There's no way around it. Yeah, but I think going back to the Microsoft camp, I think with the whole family of consoles as well, is I firmly believe that the Play Anywhere feature is going to be a massive instrument in this as well. Like, I feel like they're moving away from, that one fixed box, and the Play Anywhere is going to be that banner which ties the family together. And that's just my personal belief.
I wouldn't be at all surprised somewhere down the line we see a TV with some sort of deal done and you get an Xbox built into your telly or something,
or
like
a
that.
streaming service.
Yeah,
I'm Play Anywhere Xbox. Who knows?
I'm surprised that hasn't already been done to a certain degree. They have tried something similar, I think, in the past with like older consoles being built into TVs. But I can see that being successful. Was it?
Was the PS3 built into a couple of Sony TVs once upon a time?
I don't know, actually.
Well, we've got the PS Now thing, haven't we? That comes on some of the Sony televisions, which is kind of that idea.
Oh, okay.
But that's obviously a streaming service. But I think actually moving forward, we're maybe looking at streaming services anyway. 10, 15, 20 years down the line.
Yeah, you're cloud gaming basically.
Yeah.
It's effectively going to be. I think it's going to become like that eventually.
Yeah, I saw dinosaurs will be sitting there moaning about it, but it'll happen.
The thing is, are Microsoft utilising it in one of their games? Is it Crackdown 3? It's cloud based.
When that game sees the day of light, I think it's been delayed like 12 months or something ridiculous. That game, I wouldn't be surprised if. We've seen Scalebound get cancelled. I wouldn't be surprised if. Maybe not now that they had such a backlash after Scalebound, but it wouldn't be shocking if it was cancelled, would it? Not after Scalebound.
No. Be interesting to see E3 this year.
Yes, it would be. Looking at the exclusive they've got left, I really don't think they can afford to cancel Crackdown 3.
I think that would basically cause some real damage for them. They've been going great guns, but given what's happened with Scalebound and the fact that so far this year it doesn't look like there's an awful lot coming out for them. Whereas if you look at Sony last year it was pretty sparse, but this year it's like, look at all these games they're coming out with. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 35 exclusives.
Yeah, no, my personal opinion on Scalebound is I understand that you reached a point of diminishing turns, and they obviously crossed into the red with it where they knew that it wasn't going to be cost effective to finish and put this game out. But when you've spoken about it and you've displayed it and you've hyped so much, at what point is it on them to deliver the product? You know,
well,
like how many people pre-ordered it?
I think the difference between them and Sony is, Sony will let a game be in development for 10 years, like The Last Guardian, and then they'll stick behind it, and eventually it will be released. Final Fantasy 15 was in development 10 years, and that was released. But it's interesting why Microsoft take this sort of approach where they'll be willing to cancel a game even after X amount of years development. They seem to be different in that regard from maybe
at the very least,
other companies.
No, yeah, definitely. At the very least, they could have gotten Scalebound over the line, and it could have cost them into the red. But it could have been that game that could have shipped units for consoles for them.
It was a very different type of game for them as well, which would have been a good thing. We were talking in a previous podcast about diversification within their portfolio, and they needed it, and they still need it.
Okay, so the next subject that we're going to be looking at is the Nintendo Switch, which is what Jay wants to talk about, and the reactions we've had to the console announcement, and also the recent rumours about the SCD.
Yeah, just go back to something you said a little bit earlier on about consumers demanding more power for their money. And I just thought about that when you were saying that, and I was thinking, obviously Nintendo didn't get that memo. But, basically, Nintendo have obviously got the Switch announcement that came out a couple of weeks ago. And since then, there's been rumours, and I think, in fact, before then, Sully, there were rumours of this SCD that was going around, and it really came to me through you, Grant, actually, only a few weeks ago. It had kind of been hovering around in the background, and I hadn't really taken any notice of it. An SCD stands for Supplemental Computing Device, and it's basically, it looks like, we don't really know at this stage, but it looks like an add-on to the console that will give it more power. And the long and the short of it is that it looks like the sort of power it would be giving it would be when docked, obviously not on the move. You'd have to be lugging around a big box to do it on the move. But
about 10 batteries.
Yeah, but when docked, a car battery in your backpack. But when docked, it would put it on a par. People are thinking on a par with, say, the PS4 Pro, perhaps.
I think it'd be at about 4.5 teraflops, roughly. Yeah. Depending.
Excuse me. No, I mean it's got a handle.
It's got a handle. Yeah.
Remember the GameCube? Yeah.
That was my favourite part of the reveal event. Was it? We gave it a handle, and we might have been too early with that one.
Yeah, sorry.
Portable gaming. It's a hybrid. It's got a handle. Sorry, I was actually laughing at that point, and all for the wrong reasons. But anyway, look, I don't want to knock Nintendo too much. I do think it was a poor conference, and from what I've seen in relation to the videos that I've put out, and I've put 3 out. I put 2 out on the Switch itself, and I put another one out on the SCD, and you've put a video out as well, Sully, on the SCD, and I think you did one on the conference as well. The responses I've had, I thought I was gonna, have a shitstorm. Basically, I thought, I'm going out, I'm knocking this console, I'm knocking the conference, I'm gonna get a lot of people having a go at me, and I ummed about putting it out, the first video, and I thought, do I want the grief? But actually, I've been very surprised because the responses I've had have been, I've had people disagreeing with what I've said, and I've had, quite a good selection of ideas and opinions. But what's come across to me is it was surprising to me at how few people were actually really annoyed with me and were jumping on and saying, that this is going to be a great console and you should shut the hell up and all the rest of it. the overwhelming experience I had in my comments, and like I say, it's a small sample size, so you can't really say that it's, representative of all gamers. But people seemed to have a similar attitude towards it that I did, which was I was looking forward to it, and I was hoping against hope that they would put out a console that was going to be something we could really look forward to and really want to buy. And then we heard more about it, and we got the conference, and that was a disappointment. And then in the days following it, it got even more disappointing. If you look at Nvidia, they did their conference and that was disappointing. And then in the days that followed, they turned it round, because the more you heard, the better it got. With the Switch, the more you heard, the worse it got.
Seemed to be a snowball effect.
They saved the worst. They didn't announce or detail the worst aspects of the Switch, did they? Like the price of the accessories, the Joy-Cons, the charging issue with the grip, the online structure, and how they'd give away not even give away, they'd let you borrow one of their back catalogs of games if you purchase their online service.
For online chat.
I know, yeah. It's just a mess.
The thing is, right, Nintendo could have taken taken control of the narrative around the Switch a little bit more in terms of how it was perceived. Because, I've heard people say that the conference was done in a very Japanese way. They don't do flamboyant conferences because they're not Americans. Yeah, Americans tend to do...
It felt pretty flamboyant when that
whooping and
fucking Splatoon 2 guy came out on stage.
Yeah.
And in the next version of Splatoon 2, you're going to get an egg beater.
Here's a human too. Here's a human too. It's like I was watching fucking Sesame Street or High Five or something.
Don't forget the ice cubes. No, there's and I think Nintendo could have actually, if they'd have had someone in sort of PR and marketing who'd basically kind of controlled the way the information about the Switch was released, because it just sort of leaked out in this really kind of I don't know, sort of a kind of mishmash of information just sort of spilled out, and they had no real, they didn't look like they were in control of it, basically, and because they didn't look like it, they looked incompetent.
Yeah, Grant, do you think it was something similar that we saw with the Xbox One reveal and the DRM drama, where it kind of spilled out later from the Nintendo guys, but the messaging was a little bit confused and mixed, and some details got out that maybe necessarily shouldn't have come out in that way, shape, or form, or something along those lines, like we saw with Don Matrick?
I think you're right. I think the way that some details got released, where they didn't really come directly from Nintendo, they were sort of churning out from the rumor mill. I think that was a mistake. I think Nintendo lost control of the way that they wanted to present the Switch, and I think because they lost control, the perception of it became quite negative. It didn't help that they gave us a console that people weren't expecting to be so sort of initially underpowered. I know that people have said Nintendo have always released consoles since the N64, which don't.
But they haven't. The N64 was more powerful than the PS1. It was the cartridges that held the system back.
Yeah, I meant after that. Okay, I know the N64 was. I meant from like the GameCube.
I was going to say, even the GameCube. The GameCube was more powerful than the PS2 as well.
Yes, it was, actually.
Wii onwards, that's when they forgot the power game.
And I think the Wii was basically... The irony is that the Wii was hugely successful, but I think it's the Wii that's paved the way for what's happening now.
No, it is. It's the Wii
success. They don't know why they did it. It was like a fluke.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? A little bit.
It was timing.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about timing a lot with putting out our YouTube content, and I'd imagine it's the same with hardware as well. Like, it was the timing. It came at a time before smartphones, and motion controls had never been done in that kind of capacity before for a home experience that was extremely affordable and that had, you call it gimmicky now, but Wii Sports was a lot of fun. I've played a lot of Wii bowling, and I got my money's worth out of Wii bowling with my girlfriend.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh, so did I.
I got it just when it was released in the UK. All I had was Wii Sports, but that's all you needed because people were just playing it all Christmas.
It was the ultimate party game, and it did have great quality software as well. And I think the thing that sold the Wii was, one, they had this extremely attractive, the curiosity killed the cat kind of thing with the Wii motion controls, and the price point. The price point was ridiculous. They were basically giving these things away.
I think it was one. It was under. I think I got it for like £180 in the UK or something on release.
You buy the console, you got Wii Sports in it. Most people didn't even need to go out and get anything else. I mean, the casual gamer, they bought the Wii with the Wii Sports,
and it also came. Done. It also came at a point as well where I don't think we'd fully transitioned from standard def to HD as well. So the fact that it wasn't HD wasn't a big issue.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where we're like, it's kind of disappointing it's not 1080p, but a lot of people didn't have 1080p TVs at that time.
Yeah, they got away with it a bit because it was so early in the HD life. I mean, the 360 was the first HD console.
And the 360 launched with AV cables as well, so that goes to show how it wasn't embraced the 1080p market yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was so early in HD's life, people didn't have HD TVs. I know people that specifically bought HD TVs when they got a 360.
Yeah. Well, the early HD TVs were 720p as well. So
yes, exactly.
And then you got full HD after that. So you get HD, and then you had full HD, which was the 1080p.
And now that's standard HD, and now we have UHD and all this other shit.
Oh, God, yeah. I guess the question is, the SCD, I mean, we know historically, because I've already sort of sarcastically mentioned it, that if you're going to produce an add-on for a console that you have to sort of attach or plug in, it's not going to be successful because consumers don't want to do that. So I wonder what you guys think if they are going to release this, and this is a real device that Nintendo are developing. How do you think they will market it and produce it?
I wouldn't be at all surprised that it comes out as a replacement dock.
Yeah, that's how I'd like to see it happen, to be honest. Sense. I'd like to see two versions be offered. I think a plug-in device is stupid. And for logistical reasons, it's not wise, and you're going to have a lot of expensive add-ons to get that to work. I mean, having essentially, I think it was rumored that it would have either be a 1060 or have the power of a 1060. Obviously, it's not going to be a 1060 in a box, which I should have clarified in my own video. It's probably going to be some kind of similar architecture and chipset that will be in this box. But transmitting that kind of data over a cable, it's probably not going to happen in a cost-effective way. So I think you're right, Joe. It has to be in a dock. Just personally, and to be honest, as much as it may not be a good idea for the Switch to do this, if Switch had the games and I could get a more powerful Switch that was somewhere between a Pro and a Scorpio, I would probably get one, and I'd probably pay for it as well.
Well, how about this then? They come out with a new, more powerful dock. You've already got the Switch. You keep your original dock, stick it in another room.
Yep.
Then you've got two consoles for the price of one.
You play the base kind of scaled down version like we see with the PS4 now, on the go or in bed. To be honest, I'd probably use it in bed late at night when you just want to relax and play a bit of, play a game or something.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, when you come home from work, you get the kind of, the really high fidelity 1080p or maybe almost 4K experience on the dock, on the TV, on the big screen, when you can actually enjoy the better visuals.
The problem for me, though, is that and I said this in my video, is the timing. The timing of this thing will be crucial. And I if they released it this year, it's going to annoy people, I think.
When the patent originally leaked, or this supposed patent originally leaked, which everybody based their NX rumors on, which most of it ended up being accurate and true. Now, we haven't heard any official information about this SCD unit, which again, it's not overly surprising because it's Nintendo, but I would have thought because it's been on that original patent and it's been so long that they would have talked about it. I mean, if they were going to release it close to the Switch, I would have assumed they would have offered, like we said before, a base model and a pro model. And that could have been, that could have curved all that negativity around the power. They could have said, look, it's as expensive as a pro, or it's maybe even a little bit more expensive than a pro, but it's more powerful. And here's the base, the cheaper base unit, and here's the more powerful unit. And I feel like we would have avoided this whole kind of negativity around the power because they're giving people choice, which is what people want.
Yeah, that's true. A 1060, correct me if I'm wrong, that's quite a powerful GPU, isn't it? In the PC market.
It is still powerful, but it's the budget kind of power range of their new NVIDIA cards. Like Joe's got a 1080, which is the pinnacle of power, which is about 6 teraflops. I
remember reading about 1080. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're going up to the
new ones, yeah.
So the Titans are about $1,000 each or whatever.
Something that also concerns me with the Switch is if it is getting a 3.5 teraflop bump in GPU power, how the fuck is its CPU going to handle that power?
Good question.
Are they going to have a CPU in a box as well? Are we looking at literally a whole new system in the dock? And when you dock your Switch, it just forgets about the Switch's hardware? Because I don't understand how that's going to work. Like, a bottleneck would become a real concern if you're pumping 3.5 teraflops through the Switch's CPU, which is, it's fairly anemic by today's standards.
Well, how it works is going to be the major issue, isn't it? Because you've already seen issues regarding the PS4 Pro with some games where they're not running the frame rates that have been advertised or promised. And that's partly down to the way the games have been patched, if they're existing games. But also, there was issues with recent releases. I think, like The Last Guardian didn't run properly, and I think Dishonored 2 has had some issues as well. So there could be bottlenecks because we're getting them now with the PS4 Pro. Well, we're getting issues at least. They might not be bottlenecks.
I mean, in all honesty, I don't actually think we're going to see it. I think this was just some kind of early on pattern that was released. Maybe they're spitballing ideas. I just can't see it working.
It's not just that, is it? It's the issue that, again, it's confusing the market again, because, again, there's yet another device in an already crowded console market, because if the Scorpio's coming out as well, we've then got 2 PS4 models,
PS4 5 on the horizon,
3 Xbox models, potentially 3 Xbox models, and potentially 2 Switch. It's like the consumer's going to look at it and think, what the fuck do I buy?
Yeah.
It's like...
yeah, no. It's...
we've talked already about that, about how if you confuse the consumer, they end up walking out of the shop with nothing.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what to buy. It's like, fuck it, I'll get a PC.
Well, yeah, that's it. At least you know what's going into it.
End up going into cash converters and getting a Nuya.
Nuya. Can you imagine? Yeah, this is a great device.
I actually had a mate where we were talking about the Nintendo Switch the other day, and he's like, yep, bit of a clusterfuck, isn't it? He's like, I'm buying a Wii U. When they start clearing them all, he's just going to go play the entire back catalogue of Wii U games. He's going to wait till the Switch is dead and pick a
somebody
Switch
say
up.
that on my channel in the comments.
It's true, though. I was
going to say, yeah, that won't take him long.
I mean, I haven't got one anymore, but I honestly thought about picking up a new one and just hitting the clearance bins, picking up all the gems that I missed, on the cheap, and maybe just riding out the Switch for a little while. I've said this to people before, but I kind of think of Nintendo as being an unsuccessful Apple. Like, they have cool niche products and they're desirable, but nobody buys them.
Yeah, they're probably where Apple were for 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without the growth.
Yeah, they seem to just think they can charge through the arse, and they it's like they pretend to be oblivious to all this drama and shit surrounding it. And they're like, oh yeah, well, here's the Joy-Cons that cost $100 and here's your Pro. Be happy. Be happy. Yeah. And they just seem to be content with, I'm assuming, pretending to be oblivious to what's actually going on around them.
Well, this is it, isn't it? They are pretending to be oblivious, and I think, the issue with Nintendo is they're out of touch, and I've touched on it before, where I've said it's the hidden cost of owning the Switch that is really insidious, because effectively, they're pricing up all these accessories. And some of them you will need to buy, because if you want an extra controller, you've got to pay that money.
Yeah, no, it's a social system, so you're going to want extra controllers.
Yeah,
that's how they're selling it.
So you got party games.
It's a system.
That you're going to be playing,
it's a system I won't play by myself. My girlfriend and I will majority of the time be playing it together if we got one, like Mario Kart and stuff. And I'm not going to share a Joy-Con. Like that's as much as you can play on a Joy-Con, I'd rather an actual controller like a Pro. One thing that kind of annoys me is that can I or can I not use my Pro controller that I still somehow currently own without a Wii U on the Switch? I'm assuming they're both RF. It's RF or it's Bluetooth. I would hope that I could use that controller on the Switch as a replacement
Can I make a prediction?
Pro. No. But
no.
Then again,
you won't be able
Nintendo's usually been really good with using older peripherals on the new systems.
Yeah, but if you want to make the Apple comparison again, then
okay.
You probably won't be able to use it. That's what Apple do.
That's very true.
They invent a whole new connection system, or they think, oh, we don't need headphone jacks anymore, so we're getting rid of them.
Yeah, until the S comes along, and they're like, you need to buy this phone because it has a headphone jack.
When I buy a console, one of the first things I ever do is buy a second controller. So if you're buying the Switch, you're going to have the Joy-Cons with that thing you can put them in. But if you're going to want to play people and you're going to have the same experience for both people, and you're not going to have people going, oh, you won because you got a better controller than me, you're going to need 2 Pro controllers. So that's say it's 60 quid each. I think the cheapest I've seen is 65, but call it 60 quid each. That's 120 quid on top of the price for a start.
Yeah, and then you double that into my money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean it's at the end of the day, you're going to be spending 500 quid on this console, and it's going to be basically a Nvidia Shield without all the extras.
And the irony is, I could build a decent PC for that money, and it would outperform this bloody Switch. That's for sure.
By some considerable margin.
You could could run the graphics off the CPU and probably beat it, Grant, if you got a decent CPU.
Probably could, actually.
Oh, well. Yeah, shall we move along? I think we've probably bashed the Switch enough again.
Yeah, but I wasn't intending to bash the Switch on this.
It just always devolves into frustration and stuff, doesn't it?
Okay. Well, just moving on then to the final subject, which is something that I noticed recently. Just to clarify, what I want to talk about is why so few big games, not necessarily AAA, but I suppose it does mostly apply to AAA. Why so few of these games are released in the early part of the year, so I guess January to February. And I did a bit of research before we started, and I looked at the last 2 years just to see what was released in like the early months of those years. And Dying Light was released in January 2015, and that went on to sell 5 million copies. Resident Evil 7's just been released in this month, and that's a big release, obviously, because it's a flagship franchise.
Just to quickly sum it up, Grant, what would you consider to be good sales on a video game?
Well, I guess you might have to ask the publisher that in terms of what they expect, but I would say between 4 and 6 million.
Just maybe. To be a success, depending on the caliber of the game.
Yeah, depending on the caliber and the budget of the game, obviously affects what they expect to get back in terms of sales. But I know that Dying Light's budget, for instance, was quite low because it was made by a small Polish developer, but they sold 5 million copies, so it's a successful game. And for instance, The Witness was released in January of 2016, and that apparently, I know it's an indie title, so we have to bear that in mind, but it sold 100,000 copies in the first week and made $5 million, which, for considering it was developed by one guy for nowhere near that amount of money, that's a crazy success. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, I wonder why more developers don't choose the early part of the year to release games in, whether it's just because they think it's a bad time of year. But when you think about the fact it's winter in most of the Western world, more people play games in the winter, I would have thought, than any other time of the year.
It's a tricky kind of one to answer because I personally feel that the big blockbuster games come out at the end of the year because that's when, people are buying gifts or they're prepared to spend extra money on other people or themselves because it's the holiday season. People budget towards December or November. And I think like the only reason they don't release in January is because whether it is or not, perhaps there's a stigma attached to January, is that people are either still involved with their blockbuster games they bought in December, or there's just no money left over. Like from my point of view, that was my understanding of it anyway. And I mean, certainly probably I would agree with it that for the first 2 weeks of January, you probably shouldn't release a game. Because I know personally, I was still feeling the pinch from Christmas and New Year's and all that. Like it's just financially, it's a big month. I can't speak for everybody because other people are better off than me, or some people are even worse off than me, God forbid. Not that I'm bad off, guys. Don't worry, I'm not going to be on the street next week. But yeah, I mean, certainly for the first couple of weeks, I could see that being why they don't release games, because it's just too close to the holiday period and people are just still feeling the pinch.
Yeah, and I get that, and that makes sense. But I guess if you opened it up to a slightly bigger question, which is not everybody can release games when they want in terms of that October, November sort of golden period where you're going to get a lot of sales. So I wonder if, publishers should just try and pitch certain types of games certain points of the year because they might be more successful than others. So I know The Witness was quite an interesting... I think it was I wonder if it was deliberately chosen for the early part of the year because of the type of game it was. Because people might look at it and think, oh, it's only, I think it was less than £20, so it was like a budget game. It's the sort of game they can afford to buy early in the year because it's not going to cost them much, and also because it's a cerebral kind of game, you can just sit and take your time with it. It's very different from like a AAA release, which you might have been playing at the end of the year, which is kind of fast paced. And so there's a kind of, maybe there's a very deliberate reason why developers pitch their games at certain times of the year.
I think there's definitely probably like obviously market research to back it up. But I mean, personally, I think releasing a game in the later half of January or in February, I think it's a good idea. I mean, like you've given us examples of games selling well. And I think, late January, early February is that time where people have probably finished or they're over their November, December games and they're looking for something new. But yes, exactly. I mean, it's probably not true, but I kind of feel like maybe these publishers and developers, historically November, December, that's when the blockbuster games gets released. That's when, people have money, and that's when the huge sales and numbers happen. And if it's anything like me with YouTube, you get 1 or 2 hits in a certain time bracket on YouTube in a certain day, and you start hitting that time over and over again, and you start to see success. You start to fear straying from those time periods or blocks, if you know what I mean. True. So I wonder if that's kind of attached to it. Like there's a risk involved with it.
I think it's maybe just a general marketing thing to some extent, obviously exacerbated by the whole seasonal thing with the games industry, I suppose. But if I take something that happened to me a few years back when I tried to go in and buy some slippers, bear with me, I'm going somewhere with this. I tried to buy some slippers, and I went in, and it was the wrong time of year apparently for buying slippers.
Sure.
Never mind the fact that you want to wear slippers throughout the year if you want to wear slippers.
You're starting to worry us. You need to get out of the house.
What I mean is, my point is that if you're a slipper wearer or a sandal wearer or whatever, and not so much with sandals because you wear them in the summer. I don't.
See, I'm a thong wearer, and that's all seasons here.
TMI.
My point is though that if you want to wear slippers, it doesn't matter whether it's winter or summer. You're going to wear slippers. And that's true with gaming. Gamers don't want to just buy games at Christmas. They want to play games throughout the year. I don't go out in the sun more. During the summer, I don't say, right, I'm not going out because it's sunny outside or whatever. I'm not going to play games because it's sunny outside. I still want to play games. I might play them slightly less, but I still want to play games during the summer. So if somebody actually released a few games in those periods where they're not popular, and I agree with you, I think that period of the first 2 weeks of January is probably suicidal to release a game. But that aside, I think that throughout the rest of the year, I think that people would, if you produce a good game, people will buy it, and I think that's been shown time and time again, hasn't it?
There have been times where Grant had examples, but probably maybe a little bit outside of the window. But look at the previous Mass Effect titles and Uncharted. So that's that's Sony's biggest game, and they released it in a period where it'd be unchallenged in a period of the year where it's probably considered to be quiet. Yeah,
and that's marketing again. I mean, again, Overwatch was released in May of last year. It was released just before the summer. And Joe, you made a good point there, where it's just because it's sunny, people are still going to play games.
Yeah,
or they're still going to want to play games, and that didn't affect Overwatch the slightest. I mean, that was massive from the get go. Everyone was playing. They said recently that there's 25 million registered players.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Now. So, excuse me interrupting, Grant, but did you just say my slipper point was a good point? Was that what you just said?
But it's more about what you said about playing games.
No, I'm still fixated on slippers.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we've got a live one here who's talking about slippers.
I'll go get me pipe in a minute.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right. I think what you said about Uncharted is a good point. It's very deliberate. They knew it would be unchallenged in the period it was released. So yeah, obviously the first 2 weeks of January, I agree, not a good time to release a game. But I just think we might see in future years, and it'd be interesting to see how well Resident Evil 7 does, because that's released late in January. I'd love to see the figures.
I think it's going to do really well. I think it's going to go.
I think it's already sold quite well. Yeah. I think it's been pretty steady. I think it might have hit the 4 million mark already, but I'm not sure.
That's good.
So it's done pretty well.
I think it's just.
But yeah, I would expect to see more publishers trying maybe, different release windows within those first 2 months.
We always talk about the video game industry being cutthroat and developers and studios folding and going under. But I mean, think about it's money wise, it's bigger than Hollywood. And as much as we talk about all these studios folding, for every studio that folds, how many more studios are being created and coming up, through the ranks? Yeah. And I feel like eventually we're going to get to a point where we have so many studios, we have so many developers, and there's so many developers under Sony's belt, Microsoft's belt, EA's belt, Activision's belt, that it's going to get too crowded in those last 3 months of the year. And it already is crowded. Like we saw that with Titanfall 2, Call of Duty, and Battlefield. Yeah. Like, I mean, WTF, that was weird anyway. But it's going to get too crowded, and they're going to have to spread out eventually. Well,
we talked about it, didn't we? It's a similar topic recently about the release schedule at the end of the year. I mean, we're kind of talking about the opposite of that, in the sense that a game like Titanfall, if it was released, maybe in February or March, might have done better.
Perfect timing.
It had more attention.
Quality game, but hasn't got that same kind of buzz or hype, and it might have had a bit of room to breathe.
Yeah. So I think it's worth sort of looking. I'm sure they do market research. They employ these companies to look at how games sell at certain points of the year. So it probably is all very deliberate.
Market research will get you so far, but it doesn't necessarily. It's always going to get you to the point where you make the right decision, I guess. I mean, you're still always throwing the dice,
Exactly.
Well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're not careful, doesn't it? Because you're like, games don't sell at this time of year, so we're not going to release games at this time of year. So games don't sell at this time of year.
Hey, that's exactly what I'm like with my YouTube channel.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Okay. All right. Well, I think we've pretty much exhausted it, haven't we?
Wrap us up, Grant. Wrap us up. Any used slippers, please donate to the Support Joe Foundation.
A very pertinent point here. They were Stompies, incidentally. Get a bit of marketing in here for the people who make Stompies. They were green Stompies with little monsters on, and they flapped up when my little boy walked. So I just thought you might like to know.
All right.
that.
Well, I'm glad you added that in. So
making your editing really hard today, Sully.
Yeah. Just remember, if you're addicted to buying slippers, we'll put a helpline number at the bottom of the video, and then sorry, I'll do a proper outro. Okay, guys. Well, thank you for taking part, and that was another episode of Average Gamer. As usual, we'll leave links to our channels in the description below, and you can follow us on social media, and we'll also leave links for that. And don't forget that you can subscribe to all of our channels, and you can follow us on Twitter as well. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.